And we say to all of you guys, welcome home. Relax, sit down, get comfortable, and enjoy the weekend with us as we celebrate 100 years since the Declaration of the Little Tribe's been signed. The theme for this year's gathering is going to be the spirit of the people.
This is the 100th year anniversary of the Lillooet Declaration. We are all descendants of the Declaration, and we are all proud and strong people.
This ride, we honor our ancestors who signed the Declaration 100 years ago in Spence's Bridge. Before we started the ride, that's where we went to offer our prayers. So we may be able to come to this place and celebrate in a good way with each and every one of you. To celebrate our rights as Schlatin people, as Indigenous people. Ukomilkat Kentakam. This land is our land. It's not my land, it's ours. The air we breathe is ours. The water we drink is ours. And it's ours to hold and trust for our future children, the generation yet to come.
Well, the Statlium are the caretakers of the land. We've managed this land as our garden for thousands of years.
This land belonged to the Bulls, my ancestors. Tommy Bull was one of the chiefs who signed the Declaration. He was my grandfather. Everything I learned from them. And in those days, you had to live off the land to survive. There was no store in those days. Well, we didn't need much. We had everything. We had the fish in the water, and they had the hills to hunt in and trap in. My grandfather, since he was a chief, Then he looked after our spiritual selves too. You know, we lived holistically.
These mountains, these lakes, these forests, the home of all the animals that we know, the places where we hunted, fished, gathered. All these mountains are sacred to us, all of them. But there are some specific places that were referred to as training grounds for medicine men. Those were places that our medicine men used to go to train to be medicine men, to be Indian doctors.
Way back in the day, when our people went to the mountains, you know, it was once again a way of life. They went out there to get the deer, to get the plants, the medicines, you know, the berries and that. And it was very serious stuff because that's what helped them through the winter. And to be out there, you had to be out there in a good way. You had to become one with all of creation again.
In our stories and in our culture, our way of life, the way that we walk the earth, we're taught that we have to respect all living creatures inside our waters, in our air, and on our land, because they're all a part of life. They're interconnected, just like we're interconnected with all of them. We're not supreme to any of these life forms.
For 10,000 years, you know, they used their land and used all the land and resources. Then the newcomers came in, so they started what they said, you know, stealing their land.
Port Douglas was the original mile zero for the gold rush era. Back in 1858, that was around the time that Port Douglas was actually booming. Our people had taken them through our trails and our path along the river all the way up into Mount Currie, into the Leeltwat territory. So that was initially how the gold rush trail had set forward.
We've never given up the land. We've never sold it. We definitely did not fight for their soldiers and spilled our blood so they can come in and say, we're governing you. That never happened.
When the Mayas first started showing up, we were fighting them. We would fight them and tell them exactly what they can and cannot do on the land. Then our numbers dropped drastically, so we could no longer fight them physically. We had to pull back and wait.
Back then there's Uchelmichs by the thousands. Just in Halilwat area itself, I think there must have been over 30,000 or so.
In order for the newcomers to set up shop, develop a town, and they found the location, which was our prime village in Port Douglas. And the thing that we understand and come to realize is that majority of our people had said no because this is our land, even though that there was a warm welcome into the territory. Those that had chosen not to move were in receipt of some gifts. And in those gifts were, amongst them were blankets.
Little did the Uchelmichs know that those blankets were contaminated.
And it goes along with the history that we've seen all across Canada with what we see as smallpox, and you know what we identify in an attempted form of genocide.
The town of Lillooet is built right on a gravesite, and it's a crossroads where different people from different communities in the surrounding area brought their dead to be buried.
When that first smallpox came through, I think it took half of the 30,000. Then the second smallpox took quite a bit. Then the flu came along in the 1900s, and that killed just about everybody. I think, according to what I read, there must have been just over 1,000 Slatlim left in all of what you know now known as Slatlim territory.
Our ancestors are always here. They're here with us always. If we ever need something, we have only to ask, and they will give us what they can or what we're ready for. We still share the same mountains. We still share the same water, the same lake, the same trees, the same trails. We still share them all. They haven't left us. They've just left their flesh.
So with the legislation and policies that were developed by government at the time, it really forced Native people into what we call reserves. And so these reserves weren't adequate to sustain the community. And so there was a lot of hardship at the time.
And here we are, boxed in, as you say, in our reservations, in our bands. We have our band numbers and we have our reservations to call home. And the rest of the land around, even though it's still called Statlium territory, it's also called Crown land. And it's the same today. Nothing has changed.
I guess the government wanted us to be blocked into our reserves. And whereas when I was growing up, you know, we lived out in our regular territory. But now we're getting closed in to the square lines. Back when I was born, I started learning how to speak Statlium when I was still crawling on the floor. But the government sent us to residential school and forbid us to use our language. And a lot of the people, they either forgot their language or are scared to use them because of what happened in these residential schools. You get punished by getting whipped for using your own language.
They had a policy on the books that said kill the Indian and the child. It was a war on children, on innocent children. The government explains it as if to say, we developed residential schools to educate Indians. That's the standard account anywhere in Canada. We developed residential schools to educate and civilize Indians. What really happened was genocide, crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression against children, Indian children.
You got beat up really bad for speaking the language because they wanted to make you turn white, eh? But you can't turn white, it's there to stay, you know? And it was, you couldn't tell them that, you know? They wanted to change our ways of life.
All that schooling that's happening, when you go to high school or elementary school, you're taught you're a Canadian. But really, in your heart, you should believe you're a Statliam. You're distinct from Canada. You are not a Canadian, you're a Statliam. As long as your hearts are strong, and your minds are strong, and you pass that strength on to your children, we will survive as a nation and as a people. Our culture will continue to live, and we will continue to live as a nation of Statliam, people of the land.
All the different elements that have tried to take away our culture, our life, our spirituality, you know, and make us mainstream, part of mainstream society. It will never happen. Not when our teachings remain in our hearts.
My great-grandfather, he signed the Declaration on May 10th, 1911. Throughout BC, there was a number of Native organizations that were formed, and basically by Native groups coming together and asserting their title, indicating to the government that we own title to the territory, and it was they never sold it, or they never you got it by conquest.
At that time, we were at a really low population rate because of a lot of diseases that happened. There was about 1% of our people remaining.
The reason they got together was because they couldn't go out and hunt anymore. They couldn't go out and gather food. So they got together and made a declaration.
The declaration was developed to define to the world who we are as a people, our land base, our territory, and the fact that we are a sovereign nation. We wanted to declare our sovereignty to the world using terms that my people understood at that time. They understood that we need to protect our territory and that we have always protected it. We have never deserted it. We never left it. We never sold it. So it still remains ours.
Pan skuma the opportunity to itakma. I was raised until I was about 13 years old up in a Bridge River Valley they called a land of plenty. Further on up the valley was a place called Minto, a mining town. Both our place in Minto and a few others went underwater in '59. Clarke nitas lako, mais nitas lati istakwa. Nitlun Sheikh ako Tsalah.
It was a shame to kill that valley because the people from all walks of life, like Darcy, Schloss, Bridge River, Coyote Creek, Fountain, Pavilion, they all depended on that valley, you know, because it provided everything. I could remember people up in Tyax Creek camping there, and great big spring salmon, steelhead, coho, dollies, every kind of fish you could think of. And the moose, you'd see maybe a couple of hundred moose before you get to Gold Bridge, eh? All up in the swamp, and because that whole valley was swamp. It was a beautiful valley. But them days, up in Bridge River in Finch, the old people call it, right behind the reserve there. I could remember 10, 12 families camping up there drying meat in the fall time.
The migration trails of the deer from up the valley on the north side of the Bridge River has been cut off by building of the dam.
There were so many deer, we didn't have to go hunting. We would just shoot a deer outside our house. The deer herds would come through and they would swim across the lake here and go up into the big water country. But those herds have actually disappeared. There's no more deer that swim across the lake that migrate through this area. They're all resident deer. The fish numbers are way down. At one time, there are stories in this creek here where people could throw a flat rock into the river and it would not sink. There were so many salmon.
The Tsalah before used to fish right here at the end of Seton Lake that we call Shkamkain. This was our fishing grounds because thousands of salmon used to go through the river here up from the Fraser and go into Seton Lake, then over into Anderson Lake. But that kind of salmon doesn't come in here anymore because of the BC Hydro and the dams that were put in.
Prior to contact, there was probably 100 million fish coming up the river. There are many activities that occurred that basically destroyed salmon runs. Hydroelectricity, for one. Within this Stalium territory, there are 3 dams that basically diverted much of the water. The Bridge River system was 84 kilometers of good Chinook spawning habitat. That area was flooded, decimating that run.
been a lot of roadblocks and protests trying to stop all the destruction of our Shetland territories.
Clear-cut logging has actually destroyed a lot of territory in such vast areas that the connectivity between our biosystems is almost gone. So our land has been impacted to such an extent that it's very difficult for us to practice our culture. There's so many impacts on our land now. The hydro development being the main one, the railway and the highways, the logging too.
It's sad. It's so sad when they destroy our lands and they replace it with nothing. My grandparents always told me the importance of land to the people, for survival. You know, you hunt, you fish, you pick your medicines, your berries, you plant your food. You know, you do all these things on your land. Once it's destroyed, there's nothing.
Right now, mining is becoming a huge issue with us. It's like even with the oil sands in Alberta, where they're proposing the Enbridge pipeline. It's actually going to cross through the headwaters of the Fraser River. And we know that pipelines don't have a life expectancy into perpetuity. They eventually deteriorate and rot and leak. And so this is what we don't want to occur within our waterways, especially when our culture depends on the salmon in the Fraser. And so this is going to be another battle that we're going to have to protect our culture and our way of life.
And we were taught to think of the generations to come. You know, it takes one fish to come back in 4 years. That's the same thing. The berries, the animals. You got to think ahead. I hope that one day when my grandson has his children or grandchildren, that he can go in the mountains and experience the things that I experienced. That's why I fight for the land. Because the things that I experienced when I was a grandchild is so different then from what it is now. It's changed so much. The logging has changed it so much. Without land, without language, without the animals and the fish. We wouldn't be Schladlim, without any of that, There's no Schladlim.
The spirit of that fish, the power of that salmon, the medicine from that salmon is what helps us get through the hard times, because you feel that fish and you pull them out of the net. You feel that power that little fish has. That power is what drives them up that river. That's what he's offering us.
The summer before I went to residential school in 1953, I was 7 years old. My father took me to Lost Valley. He knew I'd be going to school in Mission, so he took me to Lost Valley, and we were there for a week, hunting and curing meat, and just being there. At the time when it was happening, when I was 7 years old, I remember I was cold, I was hungry, I was complaining about a hard time. I was complaining about the food, I was scared of the horses. I had to look after the horses. It's the place and the time I thought of when I was in Mission at the residential school having my hardest times. The thought of that, the memory of that somehow sustained me when I thought back. Those weren't hard times anymore when I thought of it. So after I grew up, I made sure that my 3 children went. I took them to the same places. I took them hunting. And they in turn are doing the same thing to get their children on the land.
Because without our beliefs, without our values, we wouldn't be here today. It's those two things that bring us, that give us that strength and that energy and that power to know who we are and to see the direction that we're going in.
Like these fishing grounds here, they've been here since time began. Of the salmon, the salmon is one of the most important foods our people has. And we need to honor and we need to respect that salmon spirit. The fishing grounds, the land. So basically for 10,000 years there was really no problems with sharing of that resource, with the coastal tribes and the inland tribes, and everybody had plenty. But it was within the last 150 years that with government there basically giving out different fishing licenses and starting to commodify our culture and our traditions. And for me, I really see that as embracing capitalism. And once we embrace capitalism, we lose our values, we lose our principles that are focused on egalitarian society. Really, in order for us to restore and have a healthy community, we really need to take a look at the land, and because we are a land-based culture, we need to start looking at healing the land. Once we start healing the land, we'll start healing the people.
This land that we sit on and that we own and we hold title to can still sustain our people if we had to fish, hunt, trap, eat berries and plants solely instead of relying on the grocery stores. And that's what we need our people to realize, that would, one, it gives us a healthier lifestyle, more self-sufficiency and independence, and develop a more sustainable mindset, along with planting gardens and maintaining orchards like we used to. So this is a big part of a huge strategy that we have as a community to develop more of this independence and interdependence.
Every year now for the past 9 years we've been having culture camps back in Packhorse Mountain.
To get back in touch with ourselves, back in touch with the land, and the ancestors, the animals and plants, and relearn what it is to be a person of the land. Because they get something up here that it's intangible. You can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it, but it's there. I guess you can see it in the eyes, you can see it in the spirit, you can hear it in their laughter.
It's really important that we carry on all the teachings that our ancestors have left behind, and we find ways to continue those teachings with our culture, because culture is always a living thing, it's always growing. We feel that it's very important that we all learn to work together. And that was also the theme of the St'át'imc gathering this year, was working together. We
have to stick together with the times that are coming and hold each other up and look after each other. I think that's all our ancestors would have wanted.
There was a circle of drums. There was over 100 drums in that circle. It was a complete circle. And inside of that circle were the children that were dancing and anybody else that wanted to dance and join them and doing the eagle dance for the next 100 years. That's what we danced for, is for the next 100 years.
We have had 100 years of suffering and poverty. They tried germ warfare on us. They imprisoned us in residential schools. They did many things to destroy us and destroy the core of who we are, to destroy our families. But you know what? Look at us. We have survived. Look at you. As a statlium. Look at you. We have survived. So it is beyond survival, people, and now it's time to pick those words up and do something about them. The words that our ancestors laid down in 1910 and 1911, they're brought to life in our blood. They're brought to life by when we speak about them, when we speak our language, when we do our ceremonies. You're bringing those words forward. You're bringing those words to life. You're implementing our title and rights. It's no longer about British Columbia recognizing us. It is no longer about Canada recognizing us. We are beyond recognition. It is now time for implementation.
We have been through a lot in the last 100 years. We're not survivors anymore. We are thriving as a people now.
The declaration as of today still defines ourselves as a sovereign nation. We are still sovereign because we never surrendered and we never will surrender.